In the winter of 1991, the country that ordered this weapon ceased to exist. The Soviet Union was collapsing, factories went quiet, the money vanished, and in the Russian city of Tula, a group of engineers kept building an air defense system that nobody could afford. It was meant for an army that was falling apart, to fight a war that might never come. Everyone told them to stop. The generals lost interest. The funding dried up. The whole project should have died in a warehouse and been forgotten. But it didn't. 30 years later, that same machine would sit on the rooftops of Moscow, guarding the Kremlin itself. It would shoot down the first drone swarm in the history of warfare. It would be sold to more than a dozen countries, and it would become one of the most argued about weapons of our time, feared by some, mocked by others. This is the story of the Pantsir-S1, the air defense monster that Russia almost threw away. To understand why it was built, you have to understand a problem that keeps every Air Force commander awake at night. The problem is not the big, fast, high-flying jet. Armies have huge missiles for those. The problem is the thing that flies low, the helicopter hugging the treetops, the cruise missile skimming the ground at head height, the small drone that barely shows up on radar at all. These low, slow, sneaky targets slip in under the big missile systems. They fly beneath the umbrella, and in the 1980s, the Soviet military knew it had a gap. Their answer had been a strange machine called the Tunguska. It put anti-aircraft guns and short-range missiles on one tracked vehicle. It worked, but it was aging fast. So around 1989, the Soviet army asked for something better.
If you're a fan of military technology and World War II history, please consider subscribing to our channel. It would help us tremendously. Thank you.
They wanted a new short-range system, something to guard airfields, command posts, and the giant S-300 missile batteries that formed the backbone of Soviet air defense. Those big batteries could hit a plane hundreds of kilometers away, but once an enemy found them, they were vulnerable up close. Somebody had to stand guard over the guards. That somebody would become the Pantsir. The job went to a design bureau in Tula called KBP. If you have never heard of it, you have almost certainly heard of its work. KBP built the guns that armed nearly every Soviet fighter jet. It built anti-tank missiles that are still feared today, and at the head of it all stood one man, Arkady Shipunov. Shipunov was a legend inside the Russian arms world. He had run the Tula bureau since 1962. Over his career, his teams created more than 70 weapon systems. He had a simple rule that he repeated for decades. A weapon must belong to the soldier. It must be simple, reliable, cheap. His neighbors in Tula used to complain about the gunfire coming from the test range at night. Shipunov could not understand the complaints. To him, that sound was the sound of the work getting done. He was a man who could not switch off, and in the late 1980s, he set his people to work on the Pantsir. The idea was bold. Put everything on one truck, a radar to find the target, a second radar to track it, a camera system to see in the dark, 2 rapid-fire cannons, and a full load of missiles. One vehicle that could find a threat, lock onto it, and destroy it, all by itself, with no help from anyone. In theory, a single Pantsir could hunt alone. That kind of independence was rare. It still is. The first prototype was finished in 1994. In 1995, KBP rolled it out in public at the Big Max air show near Moscow, and then the bottom fell out of everything. The Soviet Union had already collapsed. The new Russia was broke. Defense spending fell off a cliff. The army that had asked for the Pantsir could barely pay its soldiers, let alone buy new equipment. The military lost interest. The funding stopped completely. By every normal rule, the Pantsir was dead. Here is where the story turns, because KBP refused to let it die. With no government money coming in, the Bureau kept the project alive out of its own pocket. They survived the way many Russian arms makers survived those years. They sold weapons abroad. Export money kept the lights on, and the engineers in Tula kept quietly working on a system their own country had walked away from. They believed in it. They just needed one thing: a customer. That customer came from the desert. In May of the year 2000, the United Arab Emirates signed a contract. It was worth $734 million. The UAE agreed to buy 50 Pantsir systems. And crucially, part of that money was meant to finish the research and development that Russia could no longer fund. A wealthy Gulf state, thousands of kilometers away, had just rescued a Russian weapon program from the grave. Without that deal, the Pantsir as we know it might never have existed. But the Emiratis did not just want the old 1995 prototype. They wanted it modernized, and their demands actually made the machine far better. They asked for new radars with longer range. They asked for a longer-range missile, one that could reach out 20 kilometers. They wanted modern flat-screen displays inside the cabin instead of the old clunky tubes. They wanted a new central computer to cut the reaction time. They even wanted the whole thing mounted on a German truck, a big 8-wheeled man, so it could plug into a Western support network. The redesign took years. Deliveries slipped. The Emiratis paid tens of millions more to cover the upgrades. But when it was done, KBP no longer had a shelved prototype. They had a genuinely new weapon. And by 2007, the first serial Pantsers were rolling out to the UAE. The system Russia had abandoned came back to life on foreign money in a better form than anyone first imagined. And then, at last, the Russian army wanted it too. Around 2012, the Pantsir was formally taken into Russian service and pushed into mass production. The reject had become a flagship. So what exactly did this thing do? Let's climb inside. Picture a large military truck. On the back sits a rotating turret. On each side of that turret is a 2-barreled cannon. These guns are 30mm monsters. Together they can spit out around 5,000 rounds every minute. Think about that number. 5,000. That is a wall of metal, a curtain of fire that can shred a drone or a helicopter at up to 4 kilometers away. The guns are the last line. The knife fight. If something gets in close, the cannons tear it apart. But the guns are only half the weapon. Between them, the turret carries up to 12 missiles. These are 2-stage missiles, and they are clever. The first stage is a booster. It fires for about 2 seconds and slams the missile up to blistering speed, roughly 3 times the speed of sound. Then the booster falls away. What continues is a slim, fast dart carrying the warhead. That warhead does not need a direct hit. It explodes near the target and throws out a burst of metal rods and fragments that rip the target to pieces. These missiles can reach out to 20 kilometers and climb to 15 kilometers high. Now here is the part that made the Pantsir special. It carries 2 ways of seeing. One is radar. A search radar sweeps the sky and can pick up a target dozens of kilometers out. It can watch many targets at once and guide the system onto several of them at the same time. But radar has a weakness. It can be jammed. It can be tricked. So the Pantsir carries a backup, a camera and heat sensor package that can find and follow a target using nothing but its shape and its warmth. If an enemy jams the radar, the Pantsir can switch to its eyes and keep fighting silently. 2 ways to see, 2 ways to kill. Guns and missiles. Together, they form what the designers called a continuous zone. From just a few meters off the ground out to 20 kilometers away, the Pantsir claims to cover it all, and it is fast. From the moment it spots a threat to the moment it can fire, the reaction time is only a handful of seconds. It can pack up and move in minutes. It can shoot on the move if it has to, though it works best standing still. One crew of 2 or 3 people runs the whole thing. On paper, in the early 2000s, it looked like one of the best short-range air defense systems on Earth. And for a while, on the battlefield, it seemed to prove it. The place it made its name was Syria. Russia went into the Syrian civil war in 2015 to prop up the government of Bashar al-Assad. Its planes flew from a base called Khmeimim near the coast. That base became one of the most valuable pieces of real estate in the war, and it needed protecting. So Russia ringed it with air defenses, and the Pantsir was front and center. Then, in the early hours of the 6th of January, 2018, something happened that had never happened before in the history of war.
If you're a fan of military technology and World War II history, please consider subscribing to our channel. It would help us tremendously. Thank you.
The base came under attack by a swarm of drones. Not one drone, not two. 13 small homemade aircraft, built cheaply and loaded with explosives, came flying toward the Russian base and a nearby naval facility. This was a poor man's air force, wooden and plastic machines guided by simple GPS, and they were trying to overwhelm one of Russia's best defended positions. The Russians say the attack failed. According to their account, the Pantsir crews shot down 7 of the drones. Electronic warfare teams took control of 6 more and forced them down. Not one drone hit the base. And just like that, the Pantsir had a headline. It had helped defeat the first drone swarm attack in military history. For the makers back in Tula, it was a moment of triumph. The system their own country nearly scrapped had just written itself into the history books. Over the next months, the Pantsir kept claiming kills. Rockets fired at the base. More drones. According to KBP, by early 2020, their systems around the world had shot down about 100 drones, most of them in Syria. The export orders rolled in. Algeria bought it. Iraq bought it. Then Serbia, Ethiopia, and others. The Pantsir became the most widely sold short-range air defense system Russia had. From a project left for dead in the 1990s, it had become a global product. Money well spent, the salesman said. But that is only one side of the story, and a good documentary tells both, because not everyone who saw the Pantsir up close came away impressed. Some came away deeply worried, and the trouble began with the very drones it was supposed to stop. Here is the uncomfortable truth. The Pantsir was designed to shoot down planes and helicopters and missiles, big, fast, hot targets that light up a radar screen. But a tiny drone is a very different animal. It is small. It is slow. It gives off almost no heat. It barely reflects radar. To a system built for jets, a little drone can look like nothing at all. Or worse, it can look like a bird. Russian critics later claimed that at Khmeimim, the Pantsir kept locking onto large birds flying around the base, confusing the operators. The thing that was supposed to be the perfect drone killer sometimes could not tell a drone from a seagull. One Russian military writer went further. He shared a report from an unnamed source who claimed the Pantsir performed badly against drones compared to another Russian system called the Tor. According to that account, in one attack, the Pantsir needed 13 missiles just to down 3 drones. 13 missiles for 3 targets. That is not a kill. That is a system emptying its magazine and mostly missing. The same source claimed the Pantsir's success rate in that period was under 20%, while the rival Tor was hitting 80%. Soon after, that report quietly disappeared. Some people cried foul. Now, we have to be fair here. Experts who study the Russian arms industry point out that these two systems, the Pantsir and the Tor, were made by rival companies, and rivals plant nasty stories about each other. So some of that criticism was probably business, not truth. But the smoke was real, and where there is that much smoke, there is usually some fire. The Pantsir clearly struggled against the exact cheap, small threat that was about to define the future of war. And the failures were not only about drones. In May of 2018, Israeli forces struck Syria and destroyed a Syrian-operated Pantsir. Video showed the system sitting there, apparently out of missiles, its radar folded down and switched off, completely helpless when the strike came in. According to a KBP designer, the Israelis had even found the system's exact location because one of its operators had left his mobile phone switched on inside the cabin. The most advanced short-range system in the Syrian arsenal, undone by a phone signal. In January of 2019, the Israelis reported destroying 2 more. Then came Libya. The UAE, which had rescued the whole program, sent some of its Pantsirs to support a warlord in the Libyan civil war. At first, they did well, knocking down Turkish-made Bayraktar drones. But the reason they did well was mostly that the drone pilots did not yet know how to beat them. Once the Turks learned the Pantsir's habits, the tables turned brutally. One after another, the Pantsirs in Libya were hunted down and destroyed by cheap drones. Reports suggest somewhere between 9 and 15 of them were lost. The hunter had become the hunted. Video of burning Pantsirs spread across the internet. The system's reputation took a heavy blow. So which was it? A history-making drone killer or an overpriced target that could not stop a hobby aircraft? The honest answer is that it was both. And the reason reveals a deeper truth about all air defense. You can build the cleverest system in the world, but every system has limits. It carries only so many missiles. It can track only so many targets at once. It can react only so fast. And if you throw enough cheap threats at it, all at the same time, you will run it dry. You will fill its screen. You will overwhelm it. This is called saturation. And it is the nightmare that no air defense system has ever fully solved. A 12-missile truck cannot stop 20 missiles arriving together. It is simple math. The Pantsir did not fail because it was junk. It failed, when it failed, because war found a way to send more cheap threats than any single truck could handle. That lesson would only get louder, because the biggest test was still coming, and it was coming at home. When Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022, the Pantsir went to war on a scale nobody had seen, and this time Russia was not just attacking, it was being attacked. Ukrainian drones and missiles began striking deep inside Russia, further and further, month after month, and the job of stopping them fell, again and again, to the Pantsir. In January of 2023, people in Moscow looked up and saw something startling. Pantsir systems had appeared on the rooftops of the capital. One sat on top of the Ministry of Defense building. Others went up near the Kremlin. This was point defense of the highest order. The same truck built to guard a desert airfield was now perched over the Russian government, watching the sky for drones aimed at the heart of the state. More were placed near President Putin's private residences. The message was clear. When it truly mattered, when the target was Moscow itself, Russia reached for the Pantsir, and it scored real successes. When drones came for the Kremlin and for Moscow, Russian officials repeatedly credited the Pantsir with shooting them down. It became a workhorse of the home defense, but the war also chewed through them. An independent group that counts battlefield losses from photos and video tallied at least 27 Pantsers destroyed by the end of 2024. In late 2025, the head of Ukraine's security service claimed his forces had knocked out nearly half of all Russia's Pantsers. Russia builds only a few dozen new ones each year, which makes every loss sting. And then there was the tragedy. On the 25th of December, 2024, an Azerbaijan Airlines passenger jet was flying near the Russian city of Grozny. That day, Ukrainian drones were in the area, and Russian air defenses were active. The airliner was hit. It was badly damaged, forced to divert, and crashed near the city of Aktau in Kazakhstan. 38 people were killed. Investigators and multiple governments pointed to a Russian air defense system, very likely a Pantsir, firing at what it may have believed was a threat. President Putin later apologized to Azerbaijan for what he called a tragic incident, though Russia stopped short of fully claiming responsibility. It was a grim reminder. These weapons are not video games. When the reaction time is only seconds and the sky is full of drones, terrible mistakes can happen, and innocent people can die. So where does that leave the Pantsir today? It is one of the most produced, most exported, most used air defense systems of the modern age. It has genuine achievements to its name, including that first defeat of a drone swarm. It has been trusted to guard the Kremlin, and yet it has also burned on roadsides in Libya, been caught defenseless in Syria, and been tied to the death of civilians in a passenger jet. It is neither the wonder weapon its makers claim, nor the useless target its critics mock. It is something more human than that, a machine that is very good at the job it was designed for, and increasingly stretched by a kind of war its designers never imagined. Think back to that broken winter of 1991. A design bureau in Tula, its country dissolving around it, refusing to abandon a weapon nobody would pay for. They kept working out of pure stubbornness and belief. Then, a desert kingdom handed them a lifeline, and the reject became a bestseller. Arkady Shipunov, the man who drove it all, lived long enough to see his creation enter Russian service. He died in 2013, at the age of 85, still in love with his work to the very end. He never got to see his machine on the rooftops of Moscow. He never saw it face the drone swarms of the 2020s. One wonders what he would have made of it. Perhaps he would have said what he always said, that a weapon must be simple, reliable, and cheap, and that the enemy will always look for the crack in your armor, because that is the real lesson of the Pantsir-S1. Not that it was a triumph, not that it was a failure, but that in modern war, no shield is ever complete. The moment you build a wall, someone starts building a ladder. The Pantsir was a brilliant answer to the threats of the 1990s. The threats of today are cheaper, smaller, and there are far more of them. And the truck from Tula, the one that refused to die, is still out there in the field, still swinging its guns at the sky, still fighting a battle that no weapon on earth has ever truly won. If you enjoyed this story about the air defense system that came back from the dead, give this video a like. Tell us in the comments which Cold War or modern weapon you'd like us to cover next. And subscribe so you don't miss more stories about the most unusual and incredible military machines ever built. Thanks for watching.